So big congratulations on where Prima is right now. That's so exciting. On the biohybrid electrodes, this idea of growing neurons into the brain and then being able to read and write that way, when do you think that's going to be ready in humans? What's your prediction?
I think that the first human engraftment will happen around 2030.
Okay.
So I think like probably 5 years.
Okay. And what is the first thing you're going to tackle once it gets into humans?
Well, I mean, it's a communication device. And so motor decoding, speech decoding, all of that should be possible. And so I think in the near term, you're looking at the figure of merit for any brain-computer interface for communication is a bandwidth measured in bits per second. The record for keyboard and mouse kind of low dimension motor decoding is about 7 bits per second, which is, I think, Neuralink's current participants. There's a group at UC Davis led by, Nick Card and Sergei Stavisky, who recently showed speech decoding from parietal cortex. That gets about 20 to 25 bits per second. Human language is routinely rated at 40 bits per second. So you think that you can asymptote towards that. And so I think in the near term, what we're looking for is a 40 bit per second communication prosthesis. Longer term, this is where neural engineering and BCI diverge a little bit. And there's a lot of interest internally at looking at how is this applicable in stroke or other areas where you've lost cells where conventional BCI techniques really won't work in the same way. And potentially even organic neurodegenerative diseases, but those are very hard, and I don't want to overpromise on the timeline there.
Now, if we were just going to blue sky here, part of the mythology about BCIs is that at some point, everyone will have one of these for some reason, for communicating faster with their cell phone or their computer or whatever. To what degree do you think that's hype versus let's imagine 100 years from now, where do you realistically think it's going to be in terms of the amount of market it has?
Yeah, I mean, 100 years from now, I have this event horizon somewhere between 2030 and 2035 now that I just can't see beyond. And kind of for my entire life, I always kind of like see the future. And we are clearly in the takeoff era now. And I don't think I'm saying anything that contrarian, at least in Silicon Valley, but 100 years from now is almost impossible for me to imagine. Now, with that said, I don't think that healthy 40-year-olds are going to be getting holes drilled in their skull anytime soon. My view is that it'll be a long time before these things are really augmentative, much less elective procedures, but everybody eventually becomes a patient. There's some point as you get older, for example, the main indication of Prima is age-related macular degeneration, which is very common. And if someone lives into their late 70s or 80s, is actually pretty prevalent. And so for many of these things, eventually there will come a time when it makes sense. I mean, we consider retinal prostheses and cochlear prostheses also BCIs. When I look at, say, 20 years from now, the things that are very much research, this is not a thing that's happening in the next 5 years, but if you can get a neural interface with the bandwidth of that, say, like the two hemispheres are connected, which is about 100 million fibers on both sides that project across the midline to connect the two hemispheres of your brain into a single thing. If you can get something of that bandwidth, which is probably only tens of megabits, then this takes you into really interesting territory about really being able to redraw the borders around brains and gets at this thing called the binding problem. And that feels less than 20 years away for me. This feels not like the next 5 years, but not to the distant future, like within people's lifespans today.
So let's double click on that. Tell us about the binding problem and how you think this addresses that.
Well, I don't have a solution for the binding problem is if the brain is made up of a lot of different neurons and a lot of different areas kind of connected together, where does this unified perception come from? You see the world, you can think about it, you hear things, all of this is fit together into a coherent whole for you.
When the blue bird flies past you, the blue doesn't come off of the bird and the chirping doesn't seem like it's coming from somewhere else. It seems like a unified object.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though blue is processed apparently in one part of your brain and the motion in another part and the chirping in a different part.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's some sense in which almost all communication is about creating correlations between brains. We're having a conversation right now. There's concept spaces in my brain that are being active that I developed from like education, like learning English, learning math, learning science, doing these things. And I can serialize these neural activations to vibrations over the air, send over to you, receive through your ears, that then activate these correlations in your brain that allow us to share these concepts. And but our brains don't become one thing. And so there's some point between the types of correlations that you get between the hemispheres of a brain and the types of correlations that we get between brains that are in dialogue. And where is that crossing point? We don't know today. But I think that biohybrid devices have the potential to get close to there. And that takes us to really different regimes than kind of conventional BCI technology.